So my stance on UBI is I think it's a good tool. I think that there have been some people who have proposed it as a replacement for some of the social programs we have, and I think that's really concerning. And I would not support that. I think it has to be additive. I think it actually can be used in conjunction with a federal jobs guarantee as well,
which is what MLK wanted.
Yeah,
and not floating UBI thing. Like,
exactly. Yeah, and I absolutely support. Like, I think it's the marquee Kamala Harris Sanders bill that's in the Senate right now to give everybody $2,000 a month through this pandemic for 3 months after. Like, absolutely. That's what we should have been doing from the very beginning, is actually putting money directly in people's hands, not funneling it through banks, through businesses, to people.
Yeah.
There's actually, there's an ad that's running right now in support of my opponent from the American Bankers Association. That is like, thank you so much, Senator, for all of the help that you did, like getting the PPP loans through. And I'm like, well, why do you think the banks are happy about this program? Is it because they made billions of dollars in processing fees off of these loans? Yes, it is. And rather than just directly paying people, we always funnel money through banks, corporate power, and then down to people at best. Right. If it gets there.
Yeah. No, it's pretty disappointing. I mean, UBI is a great thing to have in addition to and in coordination with other things, as you said. But alone, it's actually kind of harms the very, undermines any kind of economic equality and economic justice goals that you have.
And that would be my concern. But I do think the thing that I really like about UBI as a concept is that it does decouple sort of a person's value from their work.
Yes, that's true. Right.
It would allow, there's people who work on my campaign who are artists or who want to be artists, but
tattoo artists.
Oh, exactly. But they can't be because they need to have a day job, to have health insurance, to have the money that they need to survive. And I do think we should absolutely talk about, like, how do we make it so that people can do the work, whatever that work may be, that actually makes them feel like a whole person and like takes advantage of the skills that they have without having to then force them into labor and work that they don't actually want to be doing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And what about, like, do you read theory? Are there like people you like, journalists or historians or economists, anything like that?
I mean, I'm admittedly not as good on theory as I probably should be. I feel like I always talk about, like, I feel like I always talk about having come to my views just through, like, life experience.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Workplace.
Yeah.
But I read, I mean, I'm in my room with all my books. I try to read mostly, like, honestly, contemporary fiction. I'm not reading much this year because of just time constraints. But I did read Stephanie Kelton's Deficit Myth.
Oh, is it good?
All of it, which is fantastic. Yeah,
I'll read that. Yeah,
I'm taking it kind of slow, but
it's not a page. You mean deficit writing isn't a page turner? I'm just kidding. I'm sure
it honestly is. I just have like 10-minute blocks every evening when I get through it. But no, I mean, I think that most of where I have come to my views through is like workplace experience and finally getting to a place where I actually had like a little bit of power in the workplace and then like realizing like, oh, that's what's been at play this whole time. Like I've been working since I was like 14, 15 years old. I was sexually assaulted in my very first job as a teenager and had no one to turn to.
Right.
And basically my option was like, I could leave. It was the assistant manager. Like, who am I going to report it to? Like, there was no structure in place to protect me there. And it was a minimum wage job and I was a teenager. That was like my very first work experience. And these things happened over and over where it was just like being marginalized, being sexually harassed, being sexually assaulted, like through all of these workplaces. And then finally getting to a place where that wasn't happening. And it was seriously just because I had gotten to a level of power where no one was going to try that with me. And realizing that it wasn't about me the whole time. It wasn't about
something you wore.
Yeah, exactly. Or my own behavior. Right. It was really just about the position that I was in and being seen as vulnerable and targetable and marginalized and until I wasn't. And that's what it's why I support having worker co-ops and unions and things that will protect and build labor power, because so many people are living that life and so many people never get out of that.
Right.
And I recognize that where I am now, I'm very grateful for the job that I had before I kind of left it to do this. But I know that there's no guarantee that I'll have that job forever. And I think that's incredibly important to recognize that, like, we have to do a better job of guaranteeing people's safety and the conditions that they work in than we are right now, because there are far too many people who are just exploited and abused in the workplace. And I recognize that I'm still coming from a place of privilege being a white woman. Like, when we talk about how Black and brown women are treated in the workplace, when we talk about undocumented workers, like, there's so much exploitation in our current system that we absolutely have to eradicate.
Yeah. Can you talk about what job that was?
Which one?
The first one when you were first.
Yeah, no, I worked in retail. Like, I was just on a sales floor, and was literally, my boss like came up to me and like groped me and just like walked away. And it was just shocking. And it's happened more than once. Like, it's happened to me when I worked in restaurants, like same thing, walking up, I'm typing in an order and a manager comes by and like grazes your rear end. Like, and like stuff like that, where you're just like, you can leave. That's
right.
it. Like, because if that person has more power than me, if I go and report them, it means that I'm going to get kicked off the schedule. It means that someone else are going to get my hours. It means that I'm not going to make money. So it's either you leave and try to find another job, or you put up with it. And that was my experience for many, many years, up until really probably the last, I don't know, seven years or so, like, of my last job, where I was like, oh, wow, this is a much better environment. So I lived that way for, I don't know, what is that, 15 years pretty much. And that was my work experience to that point. And I just had like gotten used to it, of that level of abuse. And now I'm on the other side, and I really want to help make sure that doesn't continue to happen. And restructure the way that our economy works, our companies work, like who actually has power in the workplace. Like, we need to be fighting for workplace democracy, because not only does that affect wages and conditions, but it'll affect these abuses that take place as well.
Yeah. And is that something that inspired, like, that's like obviously a lot more powerful than theory, by the way. Well, yes. That was not a setup, but is that something that like was in your head? Did that make you want to run for, because you talked about how you were involved in this nonprofit, and then did you also, did that even get you into the area of this nonprofit? Because it was a nonprofit that worked with women, right? So were those,
and that's part of what I think kind of, it's funny how when you look, like, when you're going through things, you don't necessarily realize what you're doing or why you're doing it, right? And then you reflect back and you're like, oh yeah, this all makes sense. So certainly I chose to work with Girls Inc. and do that work to help these girls.
Wait, not Inc., not INK, right?
INC, okay. Not like ink. Yeah, it was just tattooing. Yeah. I chose to do that work because I wanted to ensure that girls were growing up like with self-worth and knowing that, like, how they should be treated, right? But I got to the point where I was like, well, I don't like things that try to fix the women, that try to fix the girls, that tell the women, like, this is what life is going to be like, and this is how you're going to deal with it. And it was that same idea of just working within this same system and trying to build armor to deal with it, rather than saying it's absurd that this is how we force people to live. And that's what we should be focused on changing. So I did do quite a bit of that, like, women's advocacy and girls advocacy work, but it really just got to this point of recognizing, like, we should not be focused on telling women how they should exist in the world. We should be focused on telling the world how to change, so that these are not conversations we have to keep having over and over.
Right. Yeah. That's a really important point. And it's also important to acknowledge that, like you said at the beginning, these things make a difference and make differences, and they're like concrete differences in the lives of these women. Yeah. And you're not discounting that, but you also would, if you would, where you're choosing to focus your energy is on a more structural level.
Exactly. Which is why I decided to run for the Senate. I mean, which has been a criticism, honestly. It's the first seat I'm running for. And
Oh, you
I've gotten
lower down, they're saying?
people being like, why didn't you start, literally like, why didn't you start at school board or city council? And I really like to hit that head on, because I don't want people on my school board or my city council who see that as a stepping stone to a seat that they actually want. And I think that's what we have done for years.
Oh, I think you're saying, right.
People, like, start at the bottom and work your way up. And it's like, no, these are important seats where you can affect change. I want someone in that seat who wants to hold those levers of power and use them for good change. I don't want someone on my kid's school board who just sees it as a way to become a state rep and sees state rep as a way to become US rep. Like, we really need to focus on what is the change that you want to see, run for that seat. And we should not continually tell people that they have to work through the exact same machine to get to these seats, because that's what we've been doing for generations, and it's gotten us the results that it has. So I see no harm in choosing to run for the Senate, because this is the level of government that we need to affect to make the change that I believe we need to see in our country. And on these issues, like when we talk about climate in particular, there is not time for people who care about making the change we need to work their way up. And that's really why I'm running for this seat. And I am honestly, frankly, dismissive of that argument against me, because I'm just like, no, there's nothing that precludes me from doing this. And it is what we should actually be encouraging people to do who care deeply about affecting change in our country.